Can we skip the lecture? Just tell me the numby. My dad's waiting for lunch.
You know, there is a brutal truth about this courtroom that few people realize. People often think this is a place to determine right from wrong, but in reality, this is where fantasy collides with reality. Throughout my career on this bench, I have seen every type of person imaginable. I've seen the poorest individuals maintain their dignity, and I've seen those with the world in their hands who are completely empty inside. And sometimes it only takes one look, one smirk, for me to know that today, justice is going to have to teach someone a lesson they will never forget. But before I tell you the story of the young man who tried to turn my courtroom into his private playground, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. Let me know where you're watching from, because the lesson today isn't just for the defendant, it's for anyone who believes money can buy immunity. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single second of this case. I'm Judge Boyd. Every morning, I arrive at the courthouse while the hallways are still quiet. I like that silence. It's the only time of day the air isn't polluted with lies, excuses, and belated regret. I make my coffee strong and bitter, just like the nature of this job. As I flip through the day's docket, the case files lie still on the mahogany desk. On paper, they are just numbers, criminal identifiers, but I've learned not to trust the paper. Paper doesn't tell you who is shaking with fear and who is laughing inside because they think they are above the law. That morning, one specific file caught my attention immediately: the State versus Harrison Sterling. Even the name sounded expensive. The charges: street racing, public endangerment, and resisting arrest. These weren't the usual minor infractions like parking tickets. This was a disregard for human life. But what made me furrow my brow wasn't the charge, it was the arresting officer's note scribbled in the margin. Defendant repeatedly threatened with family status. Extreme lack of cooperation. I remember adjusting my glasses, taking a deep breath, and telling myself, all right, Boyd, let's see what his definition of power looks like. When the bailiff signaled for the session to begin, the heavy wooden doors opened. The first few cases went by as usual. Working class people making small mistakes, parents trying to resolve fines so they could keep their licenses to get to work. I listened to them. I always listen, because justice isn't a guillotine, it's a scale. But then it was Harrison Sterling's turn. He didn't walk into my courtroom. He glided in. A bespoke suit that cost more than my court clerk's entire annual salary. Hair meticulously styled, and on his lips, a smirk, the kind of smile belonging to someone who has never heard the word no in his life. He didn't look at me. He was too busy checking the gold watch on his wrist, as if his presence here was a major inconvenience, wasting his precious time. Beside him was a private attorney, sweating profusely, constantly whispering something into his client's ear. But Harrison, he just shrugged. I let the silence fill the room. It's a technique I use often. Silence in a courtroom has its own weight. It makes the guilty feel uneasy and the innocent feel heard. But for Harrison, the silence seemed to be just a blank canvas for him to perform. He looked up, staring straight at me, without a shred of fear or respect. That look said it all. Who are you to judge me? I tapped my gavel lightly on the bench, the sound sharp and cold, cutting through the low murmur in the room. Harrison Sterling, I called out, my voice deep and resonant, betraying no emotion. Do you understand why you are standing here today? He let out a sigh, a scoff escaping his throat, loud enough for the microphone to pick up. He turned to his lawyer, speaking loudly, without bothering to lower his voice. Hey, tell him to hurry up. My dad is waiting for lunch. The entire courtroom held its breath. The bailiff straightened up, hand resting on his belt. The lawyer's face drained of blood. And me? I simply took off my glasses slowly and placed them on the file. I have seen arrogance before. I have seen gangsters, career criminals, but the arrogance of a child shielded by money is a different kind of poison entirely. It doesn't come from toughness. It comes from an absolute ignorance of consequences. He thinks the chair I'm sitting in is just furniture, and the robe I'm wearing is just a costume. He is about to realize that in this room, his father's bank account has no exchange rate. I looked him dead in the eye, and for the first time that morning, I smiled. But it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a hunter who just watched his prey walk willingly into a trap. You want to hurry, Mr. Sterling? I said, my voice terrifyingly calm. Fine, let's begin. His lawyer, a man whose suit was likely worth more than my car, immediately jumped to his feet. He was already sweating, dabbing his forehead with a silk handkerchief. Your Honor, he stammered, his voice trembling slightly. My client, Mr. Sterling, is a young man with a bright future. This is all just a terrible misunderstanding. We are prepared to pay the fines immediately so we can. I didn't yell. I didn't even raise my voice. I simply held up one hand, palm facing out, a universal stop sign. Counselor, I said, my voice cutting through his panic like a scalpel. Sit down. He froze. He looked at me, then at his client, and slowly sank back into his chair. He knew the temperature in the room had just dropped 10 degrees. I turned my gaze back to Harrison. He was still leaning against the podium, picking at his nails, looking bored. Mr. Sterling, I continued, picking up the police report. According to this, you were clocked doing 95 inches a 35 zone, a school zone. At 2 p.m., I paused, letting the numbers hang in the air. When the officer attempted to pull you over, you didn't stop. You accelerated. You led them on a 3-mile chase that only ended because you clipped a parked car. I lowered the paper and looked at him over the rim of my glasses. Is that an accurate summary? Harrison let out a short, sharp laugh. It echoed in the silent courtroom. He finally looked at me, his eyes filled with that toxic mix of amusement and disdain. Look, Judge, he said, emphasizing the title with a mocking tone. I was testing the engine. It's a new car. You don't buy a Porsche to drive it like a minivan. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the podium, invading the court space with his entitlement. And as for the cop, I didn't see him. I was on the phone with my dad. There it was again, the anchor he clung to, the magic word he thought would make the world bend. Your father, I repeated, keeping my face completely neutral. Yeah, my father, Harrison smirked, straightening his tie. I assume you know the name Sterling. He owns half the commercial real estate in this city. He plays golf with the district attorney. He probably donated to your election campaign. He paused, waiting for me to flinch, waiting for the realization to dawn on me that I was dealing with royalty. So, can we just skip the lecture? Tell me how much the check needs to be so I can get out of here. I sat back in my chair. In my mind, I wasn't looking at a young man anymore. I was looking at a tragedy. Not a tragedy of circumstance, but a tragedy of character. He genuinely believed that laws were just price tags. If you could afford the fine, you could commit the crime. It was a transactional view of morality that rot society from the inside out. Let me clarify something for you, Harrison, I said softly. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. You seem to be operating under a delusion. You think you walked into a negotiation. You didn't. I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. You walked into the one place on earth where your last name is the least interesting thing about you. His smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, just a twitch at the corner of his mouth. Confusion. He wasn't used to this script. Excuse me? He said, his tone sharpening. You mentioned your father's real estate, I continued. You mentioned his golf partners. You mentioned his money. But strangely, you haven't mentioned the school children who were walking on the sidewalk while you were testing your engine. You haven't mentioned the owner of the car you destroyed. I picked up the gavel, turning it slowly in my hand. You see, out there, in the world you bought, you might be Harrison Sterling, the heir. But in here, you are docket number 4,925. And right now, docket number 4,925 is boring me with his lack of accountability. Harrison's face flushed. The red crept up from his neck to his cheeks. It wasn't shame. It was anger. Narcissistic rage. He slammed his hand on the podium. Do you have any idea who you're talking to? He snapped, his voice rising. My dad could have your job by tomorrow morning. The gallery gasped. The bailiff stepped forward, his hand moving toward his cuffs. But I signaled him to wait. I wanted this. I needed the court and Harrison to see exactly who he was when the mask slipped. Threats, I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerously low. Now we're getting somewhere. You see, Harrison, you just made the classic mistake. You confused fear with respect. You think people respect your father? No, they tolerate him because he pays them. But I paused for effect. I don't work for your father. and neither does the Constitution. I opened the file again, picking up a pen. Counselor, I addressed his lawyer without looking away from Harrison. Your client just added, threatening a judicial officer to the record. I suggest you advise him to stop talking before he digs a hole so deep not even his father's money can build a ladder out of it. Harrison's mouth opened, then closed. He looked at his lawyer, who was frantically shaking his head, signaling him to shut up. For the first time, fear flickered in the boy's eyes, not terror yet, just the unsettling realization that the safety net he had walked on his entire life might not be there anymore. But he wasn't done. Ego is a stubborn thing. He crossed his arms, lifting his chin. Fine, he spat out. Set bail. I'll pay it right now. I have the cash in my pocket. I looked at him, and I felt a cold resolve settle in my chest. He still didn't get it. He thought bail was a fee. He thought freedom was a product. Bail, I repeated slowly. You think you're going home today, Harrison? Harrison blinked. It was a slow, confused blink, like a computer trying to process a command in a foreign language. Obviously, he scoffed, though his voice wavered slightly. It's a traffic violation. My lawyer said the standard bail schedule is like, what, $500? I have that in my wallet. He reached into his back pocket, pulling out a sleek leather wallet, ready to peel off bills like he was tipping a valet. Do you want cash? Or should I just have my dad wire it to the court? I watched him. I didn't stop him immediately. I let him pull the wallet out. I let him hold it there, suspended in the air, a symbol of everything he thought protected him. Then I looked at his lawyer. The man had his face buried in his hands. He knew what Harrison was too blind to see. Put your wallet away, Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. Your money is no good here. Harrison froze. Excuse me? Legal tender. You have to take it. You seem to be under the impression that bail is a menu item. I leaned back, clasping my hands. You think you can walk up to the counter of justice, order a get-out-of-jail-free card, and pay the tab. But you are forgetting one crucial detail. Bail is not a fine. Bail is a promise. It is a guarantee that you will return to face the consequences of your actions. I stood up slowly, the black robe swirling around me. I walked to the edge of the bench, looking down at him, and looking at you, Harrison. I don't see a man who intends to face consequences. I see a flight risk. Flight risk? Harrison laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. Are you kidding? My dad owns half the city. Where would I go? I have ties to the community. He made air quotes with his fingers, mocking the very legal terms that were supposed to save him. Ties to the community, I repeated, nodding slowly. That is the standard argument. But let's analyze your ties, shall we? You have access to private jets. You have access to offshore accounts. You have a history documented right here in this report of running from police when you don't feel like stopping. I picked up the report and let it drop back onto the desk with a heavy thud. That doesn't sound like someone tied to the community. That sounds like someone who views the community as an obstacle course. Your Honor, please. The lawyer finally spoke up, his voice desperate. My client is young. He acted foolishly, yes, but remand? For a reckless driving charge? That is unprecedented. We are willing to surrender his passport. We will agree to house arrest. Anything. I looked at the lawyer with a mixture of pity and annoyance. Counselor, if this were just speeding, I might agree. But this wasn't just speeding. This was a weaponized temper tantrum. I turned back to Harrison. You told the officer you didn't see him because you were talking to your father. You told this court your father could have my job. You seem to believe that your father is a shield that protects you from the physics of the real world. I paused, letting the reality of what I was about to say settle in. If I let you walk out of here on bail, Harrison, who takes custody of you? Your father? The same man who bought you a high-performance sports car and apparently taught you that laws are for poor people? I shook my head. No, sending you back to him isn't ensuring your return. It's ensuring your escape. Harrison's face went pale. The wallet in his hand trembled. You can't do this, he whispered. My dad will destroy you. There it is again, I said, almost sadly. You still think this is about power. This is about safety. The community isn't safe with you on the road, Harrison. And frankly, you aren't safe with yourself. I picked up my gavel. The wood felt heavy, solid, real. Unlike the fantasy world Harrison had been living in, I am looking at the totality of the circumstances, the speed, the school zone, the evasion, the lack of remorse, and most importantly, the explicit threat to manipulate the judicial system through financial and political influence. I took a breath, ready to deliver the order that would shatter his world. Harrison Sterling, the court finds that no amount of monetary bail can guarantee the safety of the community or your appearance at trial, given your stated intent to use your family's influence to subvert this process. Harrison's eyes went wide. He looked like a deer in headlights, realizing the car wasn't going to swerve. "Wait," he stammered. "What are you saying?" "I am saying," I declared, my voice booming through the chamber, "that your wallet can stay in your pocket. Bail is denied." The bang of the gavel was final. It was the sound of a door slamming shut. "Defendant is remanded to the custody of the sheriff's department pending trial. Take him into custody." For a second, nobody moved. Harrison stood there, mouth agape, looking at the bailiff who was now unhooking the handcuffs from his belt. The concept of no was so foreign to him that his brain couldn't map a reaction. He looked at his lawyer. "Do something," he shrieked, his voice cracking. "Fix this. Call my dad." "I can't, Harrison," the lawyer whispered, closing his briefcase. "It's over." As the bailiff stepped forward, reaching for Harrison's wrist, the wrist with the gold watch, I saw the exact moment the boy broke. The arrogance didn't just fade, it shattered. "No, no, no." He started backing away, bumping into the partition behind him. "You can't touch me. Do you know who I am?" I watched from the bench, unmoving. "We know exactly who you are, Harrison," I thought to myself. "You are just a boy who is about to find out that the concrete floor of a cell feels exactly the same, no matter who your father is." There is a specific sound that handcuffs make. If you haven't heard it up close, you might think it's just a click, but it isn't. It is a ratcheting, mechanical grinding of metal teeth biting into metal. It is the sound of absolute restriction. And when that sound echoed through my courtroom that morning, it cut through Harrison Sterling's screams like a knife through silk. The bailiff, Officer Miller, a man who has served this county for 20 years and has zero patience for theatrics, didn't hesitate. He spun Harrison around. The boy tried to pull away, his instincts still screaming that he had the right to refuse. "Get off me," Harrison yelled, flailing his arm. "This is a $3,000 suit. You're wrinkling it." I watched from the bench, my hands still resting on the file. It was almost fascinating, in a morbid way, to watch the delusion fight for its life. Even as his freedom was being physically stripped away, Harrison was worried about the fabric of his jacket. He genuinely believed that the quality of his clothing should grant him immunity from the grip of the law. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," Miller commanded, his voice flat, professional. He didn't yell back. Authority doesn't need to yell. "I'm calling my dad!" Harrison shrieked, his face now pressed against the partition glass as Miller secured the first cuff. "He's going to sue you. He's going to sue this whole building. You're all fired. Do you hear me? Fired." The second cuff locked into place. Click. I saw Harrison's body go rigid. The reality of the restraint finally hit his nervous system. He tried to move his arms, and for the first time in his life, the world didn't move with him. The cold steel was digging into his wrists, right next to that gold Rolex. It was a poetic image, if you had the stomach for it. The symbol of his wealth was now scratching against the symbol of his consequences. "Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice cutting through his panic. He stopped thrashing and looked up at me, his eyes wide, wild, and wet. The tears were coming now. Real tears? Maybe. Or maybe just the tears of a child who realized the game was over. "Save your breath. You aren't calling anyone right now. You are going to processing. You will be fingerprinted. You will be photographed. And you will trade that $3,000 suit for a jumpsuit that has been worn by 100 other men before you." I leaned in closer to the microphone. "And Harrison? None of those men cared who their father was. And neither will the guards." Harrison's knees buckled. Officer Miller caught him, holding him upright not out of kindness, but out of procedure. The boy began to sob, a jagged, ugly sound. "Please," he whimpered, the threat gone, replaced by pathetic begging. "Please, Judge, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. I'll apologize to the cop. I'll do community service. Just don't put me in there. Please. It is the stage of bargaining. It always comes after the anger. But the time for bargaining had passed 10 minutes ago when he decided to laugh at the law. Take him away, I nodded to Miller. Miller guided him toward the side door, the door that leads to the holding cells, the door that separates the free world from the cage. As Harrison was marched out, he kept looking back at his lawyer, his eyes pleading. Call him, he screamed one last time before the heavy metal door slammed shut with a final, resonant thud. Silence rushed back into the room. It was heavy, thick silence, the kind that leaves a ringing in your ears. The gallery was frozen. The court reporter's hands hovered over her machine. Everyone was processing what they had just seen. The prince of the city had just been dethroned in under 15 minutes. I turned my attention to the lawyer. He was still standing there, staring at the empty space where his client had been. He looked defeated. He slowly began to pack his briefcase, clicking the latches shut. He looked up at me, and for a brief moment, our eyes met. There was no animosity in his gaze, just exhaustion. He knew I was right. He knew he had been enabling a monster. And today, the monster had finally bitten the hand that fed it. Counselor, I said quietly. He straightened up. Yes, Your Honor, you have a call to make, I said. Tell Mr. Sterling Sr. that his son is safe, but tell him also that his credit is no good in this building. Not anymore, the lawyer nodded. I will, Your Honor. He turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing on the tile floor, much slower than when he had walked in. I sat there for a moment, letting the adrenaline fade. I looked down at the docket. The next case was waiting. Life goes on. But I knew this wasn't over. I knew men like Harrison's father. They don't take no for an answer. They don't see justice. They see an insult. I knew that by remanding his son, I hadn't just closed a case. I had started a war. But as I picked up my pen to sign the remand order, my hand didn't shake, not even a little. Christina, I said to my clerk, breaking the spell in the room, call the next case. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and respect. Yes, Judge, she whispered. But as the next defendant walked in, a nervous woman clutching a traffic ticket, I couldn't help but think about Harrison sitting in that holding cell right now. The smell of bleach and old sweat, the cold concrete bench. For the first time in 20 years, Harrison Sterling was alone. No daddy, no lawyer, no money, just him and the choices he made. And I suspected that for a boy like him, that silence was louder than any scream. The silence that Harrison left behind was heavy, but it was fragile. I knew it wouldn't last. In this line of work, when you cut off the head of a snake, you'd better be prepared for the venom that follows. I tried to focus on the next few cases, a shoplifting charge, a landlord dispute, but the air in the room felt charged, like the sky turning green before a tornado touches down. And then, about an hour later, the storm arrived. The courtroom doors didn't just open, they were thrown wide with a force that rattled the hinges. The noise stopped everything. Every head turned. Walking down the center aisle was a man who looked like an older, colder, and infinitely more dangerous version of Harrison, Archibald Sterling. He was wearing a charcoal suit that was impeccably tailored, but unlike his son, he didn't wear it with flash. He wore it like armor. His hair was silver, his eyes were like chips of ice, and he moved with the terrifying confidence of a man who has not heard the word no since the Reagan administration. Flanking him were two new lawyers, sharks in expensive skin, and the defeated attorney from earlier, who now looked like he was being marched to an execution. Mr. Sterling didn't stop at the gallery gate. He unlatched it himself, ignoring the bailiff, and walked straight into the well of the court. He didn't look at the prosecutor. He didn't look at the clerk. He looked straight at me. Judge Boyd. His voice was smooth, polished, but underneath the polish was pure steel. I believe there has been a significant error in judgment today. I didn't stand up. I didn't reach for my gavel. I simply leaned back, took a sip of my water, and looked at him over the rim of my cup. And I believe, Mr. Sterling, that you are currently standing in a restricted area without permission. Unless you are a licensed attorney on record for a case currently being called, you will step back behind the bar. Sterling smiled. It was a chilling expression. It didn't reach his eyes. I don't think you understand the gravity of the situation, Frank. May I call you Frank? We met at the governor's gala last year. You may call me Your Honor, I corrected him, my voice sharpening. And I remember the gala. You spent the evening bragging about how you bypassed zoning laws to build your new casino. I wasn't impressed then, and I am certainly not impressed now. The smile vanished. My son is sitting in a holding cell, Sterling said, his voice dropping to a low growl. A boy, a child who has never spent a night away from home. You denied him bail for a traffic violation. That is an abuse of judicial discretion, and frankly, it feels personal. It is not personal, Mr. Sterling, I replied calmly. It is penal. Your son led police on a high-speed chase through a school zone. He endangered lives. And then he stood where you are standing now and told this court that he was untouchable because of you. He explicitly stated that your influence would nullify my authority. I paused, letting the words land. I simply proved him wrong. Sterling's face tightened. He's young. He speaks out of turn. That doesn't justify locking him up like an animal. I want him released. Now, I have my legal team here ready to file an emergency writ. We can do this the easy way. Or I can make it my life's mission to ensure you never sit on a bench again. The threat hung in the air, naked and ugly. The stenographer stopped typing. The bailiff, Officer Miller, stepped closer, his hand resting on his taser. But I waved him off. I didn't need protection from Archibald Sterling. I needed to dissect him. So that's where he gets it, I said, almost to myself, shaking my head. I was looking at Harrison and wondering how a young man becomes so hollow, so devoid of conscience. But now I see. He was built in your image. I am not on trial here, Sterling snapped. Aren't you? I countered. You just walked into a court of law and threatened a sitting judge in front of witnesses. You assume that your money gives you the right to dictate the terms of reality. You created a monster, Mr. Sterling. You gave him the car. You gave him the arrogance. And now, when the world finally told him stop, you came here to break the brakes. I stood up then, leaning over the bench, my shadow falling over him. Let me be clear. Your threats mean nothing to me. Your money means nothing to me. In this room, you are not a CEO. You are the father of a defendant who is currently in state custody. And if you say one more word that sounds like a threat, I will have you placed in the cell right next to him. Sterling stared at me. His jaw worked, grinding his teeth. He wasn't used to resistance. He was calculating his next move, looking for a weakness, a lever he could pull, but he found none. For the first time since he walked in, he looked unsure. You're making a mistake, he hissed. A very expensive mistake. Perhaps, I shrugged, but it's my mistake to make. Now, step back, or join him. Choose. Sterling glared at me for a long, agonizing moment. Then, with a sneer of pure hatred, he turned on his heel. File the papers. He barked at his lawyers. Get the appellate judge on the phone. Now. He stormed out, his entourage scrambling after him like frightened pigeons. The doors slammed shut again, leaving a vibrating silence in their wake. I sat down, feeling the adrenaline humming in my veins. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I had humiliated the king in his own court, and kings don't forgive. But as I looked at the empty aisle, I knew I had won the first round. Christina, I said, my voice steady, make a note. Any communication from the Sterling legal team goes directly to the record. No private meetings, no phone calls, everything in writing. Yes, Judge, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I looked at the clock. It was only 11 a.m. The war had just begun, but I had a job to do. Next case. The lunch recess is usually the only time a judge gets to breathe. But that day, the air in my chambers felt thin, suffocating. I sat at my desk, a sandwich untouched in front of me, staring at the phone. It hadn't rung yet, but I knew it would. Men like Archibald Sterling don't just threaten, they mobilize. They call favors, they pull strings. I was waiting for the call from the chief judge, or perhaps the district attorney, politely suggesting that I reconsider my stance for the sake of political harmony. But the phone remained silent, and that, in a way, was more unsettling than the noise. It meant they weren't trying to persuade me. They were planning to bypass me. At 1:30 p.m., I returned to the bench. The atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted from curiosity to high voltage tension. The gallery was packed now. Word spreads fast in a courthouse. Everyone wanted to see the showdown, the stubborn judge versus the Sterling Empire. And there they were, the dream team. Three new lawyers, their briefcases stacked on the defense table like sandbags in a trench. Archibald Sterling sat in the front row, arms crossed, staring at me with the patience of a reptile waiting for a mouse to make a mistake. All rise, the bailiff called out. I took my seat, my face a mask of indifference. Docket number 4925, I announced. State versus Harrison Sterling. We are back on the record. One of the new lawyers, a man with silver hair and a voice like oiled velvet, stepped forward. Your Honor, we have filed an emergency motion for bond reduction. We argue that the denial of bail for a traffic infraction is a violation of the Eighth Amendment regarding excessive bail. Furthermore, we have an affidavit here from Mr. Sterling Sr. guaranteeing his son's appearance. We are prepared to take this to the Court of Appeals immediately if this court does not rectify its error. It was a good speech, rehearsed, threatening, legally sound on the surface. I nodded slowly, letting him finish. Is that all, Counselor? It is, Your Honor. We demand the immediate release of our client pending trial. I looked at the paperwork they had piled on my bench. It was impressive. They had drafted 40 pages of legal arguments in under 2 hours. Money really does buy efficiency. Bring out the defendant, I ordered. The side door opened. Harrison shuffled in. The change was startling. He had only been in the holding cell for 3 hours, but the prince was gone. The $3,000 suit was wrinkled. The tie was missing, taken for safety, and his hair was a mess. His eyes were red-rimmed. He looked small. He looked at his father, desperate for a signal, but Archibald didn't look at his son. He was looking at me, waiting for his victory. Mr. Sterling, I addressed the father, not the lawyers. You hired an impressive team. They cited the Eighth Amendment. They cited precedent. They argued that your son has strong ties to this community and no prior criminal record. Archibald nodded, a smug smile touching his lips. He's a good boy, Judge. He just drives too fast. A good boy, I repeated, and no prior record. At that moment, Christina, my clerk, stood up. She walked over to the bench and handed me a thin, yellow piece of paper. It was a fax. The ink was still fresh. I adjusted my glasses and read it. Then I read it again. A cold chill went down my spine, followed by the burning heat of absolute vindication. I looked up. The room was silent. Counselor, I said to the silver-haired lawyer, did you run a background check on your client before you filed this motion? The lawyer blinked. We relied on the family's information, Your Honor. He has no record in this state. In this state, I emphasized. That is the problem with living in a bubble, gentlemen. You forget that the world is larger than your backyard. I held up the yellow paper. While you were busy writing motions and threatening my career, the automated fingerprint identification system, AFIS, was doing its job. It seems Harrison's prints triggered a hit in the national database. I looked at Harrison. He stopped breathing. He knew. Tell me, Harrison, I asked, my voice dangerously soft. Does the name Aspen, Colorado ring a bell? Harrison looked down at his shoes. He was trembling. Let the record show, I read from the fax, my voice projecting to the back of the room, that Harrison Sterling is currently a fugitive from justice in the state of Colorado. There is an active warrant for his arrest issued 6 months ago. The courtroom erupted in gasps. Archibald Sterling stood up, his face turning purple. That's a lie. Sit down, I slammed the gavel. I am not finished. I turned back to the lawyers. The charge in Colorado isn't speeding, Counselor. It's leaving the scene of an accident involving bodily injury. A hit and run. Apparently, Mr. Sterling here crashed another one of Daddy's cars into a cyclist, posted bail, and then fled the state to come hide here. I dropped the paper onto the desk. So, let's revisit your argument. You claimed he is not a flight risk. The facts prove he is a proven flight risk. You claimed he has no record. The facts prove he is a fugitive. I looked at Archibald Sterling. The man looked like he had been punched in the gut. He stared at his son with a mixture of horror and betrayal. You told me it was a parking ticket, he whispered. his voice carrying across the silent room. He lied to you, Mr. Sterling, I said, not without a touch of pity, just like he lied to the officer, just like he lied to this court. The entitlement you nurtured didn't just make him arrogant, it made him believe he could outrun reality. I turned back to the defense table. The dream team was hurriedly packing their bags. They knew the game was up. You can't argue for bail for a client with an active fugitive warrant. Motion for bond is denied, I declared, my voice ringing with finality. Furthermore, I am ordering that the defendant be held without bond pending extradition proceedings to the state of Colorado. He isn't going home to his mansion, gentlemen. He is going to the mountains to face the person he put in the hospital. Harrison began to sob again, but this time nobody felt sorry for him, not even his father. Officer Miller, I nodded. Get him out of my sight. As they dragged Harrison away, kicking and screaming for his father to save him, Archibald Sterling didn't move. He just stood there, watching the door close, realizing that all his money, all his power, and all his threats couldn't fix what his son had broken. I looked at the empty defense table, then at the stunned gallery. We are adjourned for lunch, I said, standing up. But as I walked back to my chambers, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt heavy, because I knew that somewhere in Colorado, there was a victim who had been waiting 6 months for this moment. And I knew that if I had been just a little bit weaker, just a little bit more intimidated by the Sterling name, Harrison would have walked out that door and done it again. Authority isn't about power. It's about being the wall that stops the crash. The adjournment was supposed to be a break, but for me, it was the calm after the explosion. I sat in my chambers, the blinds drawn halfway down, casting long stripes of shadow across the floor. I could hear the faint sounds of the city outside, sirens, traffic, life moving on. But inside these walls, time felt suspended. I poured myself another cup of coffee. It was cold, but I drank it anyway. It tasted like the morning had felt. Bitter. I wasn't celebrating. People think judges enjoy these moments, the gotcha moments where the gavel comes down and the bad guy loses. We don't. Because every time I have to reveal a monster like Harrison, it reminds me that there is a victim somewhere in this case, a cyclist in Colorado whose pain was ignored so a rich kid could keep playing pretend. There was a soft knock at the door, not the rhythmic, confident rap of a lawyer, nor the hesitant scratch of a clerk. It was a heavy, singular thud. Come in, I said, not looking up from my paperwork. The door creaked open. Standing there was Archibald Sterling, but he wasn't the titan of industry who had stormed into my courtroom 2 hours ago. The armor was gone. His shoulders were slumped, his tie was loosened, and he looked 10 years older. He didn't have his legal sharks with him. He was alone. Judge, he said, his voice raspy. May I have a moment? Off the record? Technically, I should have said no. Ex parte communication is strictly regulated, but the case was effectively over in my jurisdiction. Harrison was being extradited, and looking at the man in front of me, I didn't see a litigant. I saw a father standing in the wreckage of his own making. 5 minutes, I said, gesturing to the chair opposite my desk. And if you threaten me again, I will call the marshals. No threats, he whispered, sinking into the chair. He looked at his hands, manicured, powerful hands that had built skyscrapers but couldn't build a man. I didn't know. I leaned back. You didn't know about the warrant? Or you didn't know who your son really was? Archibald looked up, his eyes hollow. Colorado. He told me he was going skiing with friends. He came back, different, quieter. He asked for a new car because he said the old one had mechanical issues. I just bought it for him. I didn't ask questions. I just wrote the check. That is the problem, Archibald, I said, dropping the formalities. You have spent his entire life writing checks to cover the cracks in his character. You thought you were helping him. You thought you were giving him the best life possible. But you weren't raising a son. You were funding a fugitive. He flinched. I love him. I wanted him to have everything I didn't have growing up. And you succeeded, I replied ruthlessly. You gave him everything, except the one thing that actually matters, accountability. You taught him that actions don't have consequences. You taught him that if he breaks something, you buy a new one. If he hurts someone, you pay them off. But you can't pay off a warrant, Archibald. and you can't write a check to fix a spinal injury on a cyclist. Archibald covered his face with his hands. What happens to him now? Now? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the courthouse square. Now, the fantasy ends. The extradition van will be here within the hour. He will be transported in shackles. He will stand trial in a state where your name means absolutely nothing. He is going to face a felony charge that carries mandatory prison time. I turned back to face him. And you are going to let him. Archibald looked at me, startled. What? You are going to let him face it, I said, my voice hard as stone. Do not hire the dream team for Colorado. Do not call the governor. Do not pull strings. If you love that boy, if there is even a shred of the father you claim to be left inside you, you will let him stand alone. Because if you save him again, if you buy his way out of this, the next time he gets behind a wheel, he won't just hurt someone. He will kill them. The room was silent for a long time. The air conditioner hummed. I watched the internal struggle play out on his face, the instinct to protect warring with the brutal realization of failure. He won't survive prison, Archibald whispered. He's soft. He is soft because you made him soft, I countered. But humans are resilient. He might break, yes. But sometimes, Archibald, you have to break a bone to reset it correctly. Right now, Harrison is broken in the wrong places. Prison might be the only place where he can actually heal, where he can learn that he is just a man, not a god. Archibald stood up slowly. He looked at the family photo on my desk, my own kids, grown and gone. You think I'm the villain here, don't you? I think you are the architect, I corrected. Harrison is just the building that collapsed. He nodded, a jerky, painful motion. He walked to the door, his hand resting on the knob. He didn't look back. Thank you, Judge, for the reality check. Mr. Sterling, I called out just before he left. He paused. The car, I said, the one he crashed today. Don't replace it. He let out a short, dry laugh, a ghost of the arrogant laugh I had heard from his son earlier, but stripped of all humor. I think I'm done buying cars, Judge. The door clicked shut. I sat alone again. The shadow on the floor had moved. The day was ending. I felt a profound sense of exhaustion, the kind that sleep doesn't fix. I had won the battle. I had upheld the law. I had delivered the punishment that felt real. But as I packed my briefcase, I couldn't shake the image of the father walking away. It was a victory, yes. But in my line of work, even the victories are tragic. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for the transport officer. Is he secure? Yes, Your Honor. The voice crackled on the other end. He's in the van. He's crying, asking for his dad. Let him cry, I said softly. It's the first honest thing he's done all day. By 5 p.m., the courthouse begins to shut down. The public leaves, the metal detectors are turned off, and the marble floors are polished for the next day. I walked out of the building, the heavy oak doors closing behind me with a satisfying click. The air outside was cool, a stark contrast to the heated atmosphere of my courtroom just a few hours prior. I stood on the steps for a moment, watching the city move. Cars honking, people rushing to catch buses, life flowing in its chaotic, beautiful river. Somewhere in that traffic was a transport van heading toward the interstate, carrying a boy who had woken up in a silk sheets and would be sleeping on a steel cot. You see, Harrison Sterling didn't just lose a bail hearing today, he lost his mythology. For 20 years, he lived in a world where actions had no equal and opposite reactions. He lived in a frictionless vacuum created by his father's checkbook. Today, gravity finally found him. I know why you watched this story. You didn't watch it because you enjoy seeing a young man cry. You watched it because there is a part of you, a deep, instinctual part that craves balance. We live in a world that often feels rigged. We see the powerful fail upwards. We see the wealthy buy their way out of consequences. We see rules applied selectively, and it makes us cynical. It makes us feel like justice is just a fairy tale we tell children to make them behave. But today was proof that the fairy tale can still have teeth. When I looked into Harrison's eyes as the cuffs went on, I saw the exact moment his universe fractured. It wasn't cruelty that broke him, it was reality. And reality, while painful, is the only place where true redemption can happen. If I had let him go, if I had accepted that bail, I wouldn't have been saving him. I would have been an accomplice to his next crime. I would have been the reason the next cyclist didn't make it home. Some people will say I was too harsh. They will say he's just a kid. To them, I say this. A 3,000-pound vehicle moving at 95 miles per hour through a school zone is not a toy. It is a missile, and the person guiding that missile needs to understand the weight of the trigger. Archibald Sterling left my chambers a broken man, but perhaps, for the first time, an honest one. He realized that you cannot outsource parenting to a bank account. You cannot bribe character into existence. Today, he stopped being a financier and started being a spectator to his son's fate. It is a painful place to be, but it is the only place from which he can actually learn. As I walked to my car, my old, reliable sedan that certainly isn't a Porsche, I thought about the victim in Colorado. I don't know their name. I don't know if they will ever walk properly again. But I know that tonight, for the first time in 6 months, the system worked for them. The person who hurt them is coming back to answer for it. That isn't vengeance. That is the bare minimum of civilization. Justice isn't about being nice. It isn't about being liked. It is about being the wall that stands between order and chaos. It is about saying no when everyone else is too afraid or too bought to say it. Harrison Sterling wanted to know if I knew who his father was. He got his answer. But more importantly, he found out who he was. He is docket number 4,925. He is a fugitive, and tonight, he is just a man in a cage, waiting for the sun to rise on a world he can no longer buy. I'm Judge Boyd. Thank you for entering my courtroom. If you believe that accountability should have no price tag, hit that subscribe button, share this video, because the only way we keep the system honest is by watching it, by demanding that the blindfold on Lady Justice stays tight, and that her scale never tips for gold. See you next time. Court is adjourned.